Welcome back to the Persistence Mastery Podcast. Today we're going to talk about giving feedback. A couple things I want to speak to is before we jump right into it. Website www.persistencemastery.com is up and running. So if you haven't had a chance, check out our website. And this podcast, although it's on communication skills, one of the things I like to focus on is giving content that's plain, practical, and practicable. Let me say that again: plain, practical, and practicable. A lot of what you'll hear in this podcast is common sense. But as we know in our day to day, common sense is not always common. 80% is body communication, 15% is tone, 5% is speaking. You probably have heard these statistics when it comes to communication skills in another fashion as we talk about giving feedback today. Here's the first skill when it comes to giving feedback. It's really the skill of listening. You've probably heard me speak about this on previous episodes. They're not new to that. Listening Pays by Rick Bommelj will say that listening is the skill of seeking to understand, not always responding. Let me say that again. Listening is the skill of seeking to understand, not always responding. What does that mean when it comes to giving feedback to another individual? Well, it's simply this. One of the main things you can work on is asking questions. That's one of the key things. A good friend of mine recently went through a tough time, and this isn't somebody who reports to me. We don't work in the same industry. This is just somebody who's been a friend through professional networks. He started to share with me about how the company he's working at is starting to single him out. And he's sharing with me, he's like, man, I don't understand. He's like, I got over a 20% closing rate. I'm crushing it. And it seems that they're not getting my commissions out as quickly as I'd like. And I'm not going too far into the payment structure, but they pay a certain way that not when the deal's closed, but typically when a certain aspect of it's complete post sale. And he's going on and on. And to be fair, the situation he's in is there's some external challenges going on. And I was mindful of that. I knew that because we had previous calls where he confided in me. And he's going on, and I'm in this moment where I'm tempted to say to him, well, here's the thing. I said, companies have struggles too. It's not always about you. Companies have overhead costs, they have bills, they have to think about those things in order to keep paying you. And I was tempted to play devil's advocate. I was tempted to do that in this state. And luckily, I remembered that a really good method in giving feedback was the HALT method. The HALT method means don't talk to someone or necessarily give someone harsh feedback when they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Let me say that again. The HALT method stands for don't give feedback to someone typically when they're in a state of being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So he's confiding in me. He's sharing me all the stuff the company's doing to him and how he's struggling in his personal life. And before I crossed the line of trying to just play devil's advocate, I caught myself remembering the HALT method. And I said, well, what are your challenges now? And what choices do we have that you can control? And there was, in all this heat of emotion and conversation, he stopped and he said, I'm not sure. I guess one thing, and it was amazing because you could actually feel in this phone conversation the tide shift. It went from a victim mentality, which a lot of us fall into when something hard hits us in life, and I'm guilty of that too, to, well, how can I take control back? See, the reason we want to listen and seek to understand and ask questions is to empower the individual to find them on their own rather than give our impression, give them our mindset. Because here's the reality: your situation, their situation, your neighbor's situation are not equal. There are different parts that are challenging, and it's important to them. Viktor Frankl's books on man's search for meaning is a phenomenal book, and it talks about that suffering is relative to the situation. Suffering is relative to the situation. Meaning, somebody who could be going through something through a physical trauma and somebody going through the emotional trauma, the same feeling they have from those experiences, although on paper or on the news, may seem vastly different, but the feeling of suffering is the same. So we have to be mindful of that. And when we're giving feedback to another professional or person in our lives, the next thing is eliminate passive aggressive comments. Passive aggressive comments are very, very hurtful and dilute giving feedback very quickly. Simple example might be, I really like this project the way it turned out, which is surprising because you tend to miss a lot of details in other areas. See, right there, it started off with, this was great, but you're not good enough, is what that person just heard. So if you're somebody who likes to give passive aggressive comments, and give yourself grace. Maybe you're in a state of still learning. But what happens is when we give too many passive aggressive comments to that person or professional is it actually leads to creating a culture of fear, which creates criticism, which is created by criticism and can start to create cortisol in our bodies. You can actually look this up. It's pretty interesting. The more cortisol we have in our body is 3 times more potent when we're in fear, and it gets more rapid. And passive aggressive comments lead to that. You're telling them they're not good enough. And over time, that compound effect of giving those passive aggressive comments creates a flight or fight mode in that individual or in that team if this is how we're conducting our feedback. You know, I remember reading this book, Making Unstoppable Teams. It's a really good book by Alden Mills, and he was an ex Navy SEAL. And what he has found is that companies and teams that are led by fear are detrimental, hurt the company, while teams that are led more through care. And in his book, CARE is an acronym that says for connect, achieve, respect, and power. Let me say that again. The CARE method from Alden Mills from the book Making Unstoppable Teams, ex Navy SEAL, says care is about connect, achieve, respect, empower. This is a Navy SEAL who's gone through some pretty intense times. And he speaks to these important factors because when you're down in the trenches with someone and somebody's on your team and they're looking out for you, you got to know they have your back. You got to know they're there for you. Well, and you might say, well, that's kind of an extreme example. Well, here's my point. If we don't catch these early and often, avoiding passive aggressive comments, we start to create that fear in that individual. And then you have another one on one, and then you have another one on one. So lead with the care method from Making Unstoppable Teams by Alden Mills, where you can connect, achieve, respect, and empower someone more when we give feedback. So, a simple example, if we're going to give feedback and avoid a passive aggressive comment, it's just, I got to tell you, the way this project came out, it's really great work. Keep it up. That's it. You might have those other thoughts about them, but let me ask you a question. Saying those passive aggressive comments to that person, what does that do for you? Ask yourself that question. What does that do? I know for me, what it doesn't do is it doesn't serve that professional or teammate I have. Here's something else that I think will also serve your process. And this is going to be more kind of in a company employee manager setting. One of the things you can also do to improve one on ones or coaching is to set yourself up for success in your feedback sessions or one on ones is having a structured agenda that you follow while still allowing empathy to be part of those one on ones. Here's a tip you can do. If you're a manager who typically likes to, you book the one on ones, I do it, you go when I say so. What might serve you better is giving that employee who reports to you control by simply saying, well, Tuesday and Thursday are my days for one on ones. Why you look at my calendar, I'm going to keep those open for one on ones. You pick some times that work best for your schedule. as you balance things. See, now what's happened is when we allowed them to book the one on one on their own with you, now we're empowering that person to take control of their career and ownership in the company, rather than we're the one always setting it. So that's another thing. And when I talk about structure is typically in a manager employee setting is a simple structure that I preferably like is we're going to cover projects, we're going to cover ideas, and we're going to cover the actions needed to improve on those projects and see where we're at to be able to embrace these ideas. That's it. That's a simple structure I like to keep rapport top of mind and allow that person to be the priority as well. The next thing when it's important to giving feedback is make sure you guys are aligned on your goals. Now, goals could be in a lot of different settings. Typically, in a professional manager employee type setting, you want to have what they call SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time based. And you're going to want that person to write those goals, talk through them, and it's important that you put the possible roadblocks to those goals as well and discuss as a team, meaning you and that person, when if these roadblocks were to happen, how would you overcome them? How would you overcome them? And it's important that when we set these goals and have these one on ones, the next thing what's important about giving feedback is keep those front and center in the discussion. Keep those front and center as the catalyst for you to ensure you can influence and help this person to be stronger and a better professional in their day to day. Now obviously in a career setting that's a little more structured, you understand that you might be saying to yourself like, well, what about like in my personal life, etc., like how can I keep goals front and center? Well, you don't have to necessarily set smart goals if it's just something a little more impromptu. But what you could do to kind of hint toward goals is just say, what we talked about earlier. It goes back to asking questions. I was on a conversation with another good friend of mine about a month ago or so where he was kind of struggling to make a decision on if he was going to take this job. He really liked the company he was at and he had built these relationships. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, knowing what you know now and knowing what you can have, I said, if you didn't have all the relation stuff and both offers came in at the same time, which one would you go with? He goes, I know the answer. I just need to process it. And my goal is I just want to make the right decision to ensure it's what's best for my household. And I said, you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. And I respect you for that. The other thing that'll make you more effective in giving feedback is establishing healthy boundaries. Here's an easy way you can start to establish healthy boundaries for you and this teammate. And we'll just talk about in a professional setting. I'm not licensed to be a therapist. I do recommend that service. I think it's a great service. I have a therapist for myself. But one way you can start to establish healthy boundaries in the professional workplace is to take a behavior test. Or what you can do is go on Strengths Quest. So if you were to go on Google, type in Strengths Quest, you can take a questionnaire and get your top 5 strengths from Strengths Quest, which is from the Gallup organization. I recommend that if you and a teammate are just starting out a new direct report, I recommend having some type of personality assessment. And again, I don't personality assessments are fine, but keep in mind that behavior does change based on environment and circumstances when you take them. Just because you take that test at that time does not mean you'll be in a different behavior state 30, 60 days from now, because environment and circumstances will most likely change. But going back to how we can keep feedback strong or keep one-on-ones more effective is by taking Strengths Quest, you and that person together, and simply just saying to that person, listen, I think I want to make us work more effectively together. That's always one of my goals. would you be open to taking a strengths quest assessment with me? So whenever we do things with someone, we create unity. We do things to someone, we create separation. And that way, we can better understand how we can work together and understand each other's boundaries to keep productivity high. So that's another thing on giving feedback. Take a personality behavior assessment, or from the Gallup organization Strengths Quest, to get your top 5 to know how you can work better together to keep one-on-ones more effective and know those boundaries, so when you give feedback you can be mindful and top aware and improving that skill in the workplace. These essential skills that you'll work on as we bring this podcast toward the end is really my goal whenever I produce an episode, is to help you empower, educate, enable, and engage you to apply what you've heard in this episode. So that's my call to action with you. Select one tangible action you can do to improve giving feedback in your day to day career and personal life from this episode and apply it today. Don't wait. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't just write it down. Just do the next right thing and pick one thing from this episode and apply it today to improve the skill of giving feedback in your day to day.